Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. It's funny, I think of my fault line days. And how you start it? You got to start it with a huge amount of energy. And oftentimes it's like, okay, I need my coffee. Give me my coffee. All right, now I have this kind of energy to bang around with. But no, guys, I am glad that you could join me for today. It is what, Tuesday? It is the 18th of February. And big events are taking place around the world. I want to give a shout out to my chat, U.S. Navy vet. Shout out to you, Diane Thomas. Good morning to you. And I think you two are the only ones that are effectively there this morning. So shout out to both of you. I know there's more, but still, those are the ones that have shown up. Big events taking place. I feel myself in a weird space. There are people who are full-throated in ideology, and they would clump together, and they would fight, they would bitch, they would moan, they believe that ideology. But the test of it is, okay, when reality changes a bit, do you accept that reality is true or false? Meaning, when your ideology is put up against, okay, this is what's true, and are you going to back the thing that's true, even if it doesn't necessarily fit within the confines of the ideology and the war that you waged with that ideology against whoever you waged that war with? There is no space for nuance. Nuance doesn't work. Full-throated works. Nuance, less so. So I find myself in a weird spot. I find myself on the left. If you talk to me about policy, it would be definitively on the left. Healthcare, education. But in that also, in healthcare education, what's built into healthcare and education is attending to the well-being of the individual, the human, a humanitarian point of view. What does that look like when you put that up against wars? And what I mean by that is people are against war in theory. It's a horrible thing in theory, but also in fact. It's that part that it's bad in fact to the human being that I'm pointing to in this. What happens when a man you define to be an ogre, that the people on your flanks that you identify with as being close to you in political point of view, also define the man to be an ogre, and then the man ends a war? A war that has killed hundreds of thousands of human beings, nearly 1 million people dead. What do you do with that? And do you say, well, that guy's an ogre, so anything that he does is fruit of the poisonous tree, in which case you can't touch it, because if you touch it, you give weight and credibility to somebody who's an ogre? Or do you say, thank God he ended a war that killed hundreds of millions of people, and he is putting a close to something that should have never happened, and it was ghastly in its conception and its outcome in actuality? Are you an honest actor? Do you call out something that is honest, that may cut against your own, let's say, framing? Well, let's say your own ideas of people who are good and people who are bad. I'm amazed by that take. And the reason I say that is it splits the opposition on some level. It comes up and says, all right, new norm. Previous idiot got us close to ending the world. We're not going to do that. We're rich. We enjoy our life. We're rich. Joe Biden went off the reservation. So we need to make things right. And we need to reorganize how this operates so we can continue to be rich, continue to breathe the sweet air, and continue to keep it moving. Now, I don't know if that's Trump's framing, right? He is rich. And you can imagine he wants to live as long as he possibly can being rich, because, I would imagine it's a decent life. But there's something to be said about this idea of we're ending the war. Period. Say what you want. We're ending the war. We're bringing it to a close. Shouldn't have started. And so I'm ending it. And I look at that and I applaud. I feel it's the most natural thing and most honest thing in the world to say, hey, that's good. I applaud that. That's good. My head is in a tailspin, if I'm being bluntly honest with you. Um, and I would imagine that when Mark was talking about Russia, they are too. Also, I want you to notice something in the conversation with Mark yesterday. He is being skeptical, as he should be. He's being an analyst, as he should be. But there's hope. There's hope. That conversation, look, I have spoken to Mark when something bad has happened and his spirits are more morbid. There was joy in that conversation, not something that he said. It is a feeling that you get when you talk to him, and his emotions bleed through because he's a person, and those emotions are hopeful. This is wild. This is different. This is new. Moscow heads is in a spin, like most of us, as Donald Trump goes onto the world stage and reorganizes European and transatlantic relationship by himself. And points out, A, you guys are acting like children. B, you're living in fantasy land. C, you are breaking the very values that you set up for yourself. This is an astonishing thing for an American president to effectively belittle, talk down to allies over this issue after spending the last several years fucking up the relationship in every degree that you could possibly fuck up. That's astonishing. That's new. I've never seen that. So my typical cynical framing of this stuff I don't know where to go with it. I could say that he's making it up, but he doesn't seem to be making it up. He's taking every step that you would think to set up a context and a framework by which to end the war. For one, unprovoked war of aggression has gone. Nobody says that anymore. Two, long before Putin, expansion of NATO to the border was the right line. Thank you. Thank you. Acknowledgement of reality. Three, Russia is not going to accept a situation where the war flares up in 6 months. We need to end it. And we need to end it fully. Okay, again, this was all of these are lines that Russia has used, which means that there's a language and a space for these people to talk, for them to negotiate, because they accept basic premises of reality, as opposed to unprovoked war of aggression. Russia was going to take 150,000 troops and go barreling all through Europe and take everything associated with Europe. This was nonsense. But this was the nonsense that they continuously used to sell the war. And so when you hear an American president accepts the basic tenet of how it started, that's big. That's space. When you hear Kellogg effectively babysitting, saying his job is to babysit Europe because they're going to flip out, that's progress. When you see Rubio and Lavrov in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, right now, talking, and this is after last week, a conversation took place with Putin and Trump that both sides are crowing about as good. This is progress. This is good. Meaning it's not conceptual. What they're trying to do, it's taking place in actual fact. They are moving to end the war. They're moving to end the conflict. And it was put on the table by a U.S. was former Pentagon officer David Pine, says there's a threat to Europe if they don't get on board and if they take action to try to undercut the peace negotiations, that Trump will pull troops out of Europe, or for that matter, pull the U.S. out of NATO, or at the very least kill any, let's say, guarantee that the U.S. will get involved. This is his stick. I would imagine there's going to be a carrot somewhere. But I don't get the sense that Donald Trump considers Europe to be a power in the world. And because he doesn't consider them to be a power in the world, they don't matter. Now, they may not like that. It may hurt their feelings. But it is what it is, what it is. I am fascinated. That's all. I am. My mind is blown. And my mind is blown because a U.S. president is using U.S. muscle to shape events in the world that ends a conflict. Now, yes, there's Gaza, and Trump is trash on that issue. But you take your wins when you get your wins. And the Democratic Party went with this idea of forever wars. I find that to be atrocious. I find it to be atrocious that we're at odds with countries around the world that we don't need to be at odds with, purely out of ideological fashioning. And I will go further, not just ideological reasons, but they had this idea that Trump worked with the Russians to get elected. And they used that to whip up a frenzy in the party of Russophobia. It was weird. It was strange. It made no sense in reality-based terms because they were never going to get what they wanted. And yet, that's what they went with. That's absurd. It's absurd. And so when you get a U.S. president, even one that I would consider to be an ogre, hits a right note, I got to give him credit for it. There's no way around it. Now, they may not. They may hold on to this idea that, well, he's an ogre, you can't give him credit, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, fair enough. As a lefty, it is built into the bricks that you are typically anti-war. And if the president is going in that direction with not just Russia, but also hopefully with China, hopefully goes back to the North Korean negotiations, I find that is to be a better world. I can only move it in the direction of a better world. I'm not going to get everything I want. This I want. Even, by the way, if I don't get my job back. A million people got killed. And they can't define why. And you get part of the political spectrum that wants to maintain that and keep that going. I think those people are lunatics. I think they're sociopaths. I don't know how you look at that and be okay with that. And not just be okay with it, want it to continue. I don't want it to continue. Even if I get nothing out of it, I don't want it to continue. I care about the fact that all of those people are being killed. So I find this to be a positive thing, not a negative thing. And just fascinated by it. I am just super fascinated by it. Right here, this is David Pine. This is coming out of Sputnik, by the way. I just want to point that out too. Trump may exit NATO. Europe derails, if they derail talks. Former Pentagon officer David Pine says this threat is realistic, and they go into what they know so far. Trump might withdraw U.S. security guarantees from two countries that block any potential peace deal, or even exit NATO entirely. He sees the alliance as outdated, unnecessary. U.S. security warns. There's something else with this, and the reason why it says two countries. Europe, out of the blue, had what they call an emergency summit. As I say, Europe is freaking out, they're panicking. At the emergency summit, Keir Starmer, with a broken military, screams out that the UK troops may go into Ukraine. Okay, this is nonsense. But this is what they were putting out right here. Starmer and Macron, as if they matter. I want to go to my guests. I am joined with, there we are. I'm sorry. We're joined with Arnaud Delvary. How you doing this morning? You doing okay?
I'm fine. Thank you, Jamal.
No, man, thank you for joining me. I got to get your take as a somewhat of a broad question, but I'll ask it anyway. What are your thoughts on the talks? Are you hopeful? Are you, maybe hopeful is not necessarily the word. What are your expectations with these talks? Right now, Russia, or you can say Moscow, and the United States, Washington, are meeting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And this comes only after a week of having a conversation between Trump and Putin. So they're moving pretty fast on this issue. People have pointed out their objective goes beyond Ukraine. So there seems to be a lot that they're putting on the table in these negotiations with the idea of normalizing relations between Russia and the U.S., meaning this goes beyond Ukraine. Give me a take on this. Just as a broad question, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, we should take into account that this is the first time high delegations between the two countries are meeting in any kind of format
Mhm.
for literally years, which is in and of itself an anomaly when one considers the security questions that should be tackled and which should be subjected to at least a constant, if not permanent, a communication line between Washington and Moscow. So this in and of itself, I would say, is an achievement and something to feel like optimistic about. Now, as you say, yes, Ukraine is but one of the issues likely to be discussed in Riyadh. And there's talk now about an economic side to the resumption of, or as you said, the possible normalization of relations between the two countries. So obviously, talks are ongoing right now. We could expect a briefing, if not at the end of the day, late afternoon. I would assume late afternoon. I'm in Moscow, so I would say in a couple of hours. And we'll see also if we have somewhat of a framework bearing on resolving the crisis in Ukraine. What we can say is that there's already talks about a summit between Putin and Trump,
Right.
possibly being held as early as next week in the same venue. So what we can definitely gather at this point is the willingness on both sides to really move fast
Mhm.
and not allow the Europeans to somehow concoct and or create a alternate, if not parallel narrative.
Well, they're
So
freaking out. They're losing their minds.
yeah,
They're in a full blown panic. I'm fascinated by this, and I honestly can't tell whether their panic is real or whether the panic is manufactured. And what I mean by that is, I watched one of the guys cry on stage for rules based order. That is astonishing to me. I've never seen anything like it. I've watched them come up with this idea that Russia is a looming threat and is ready to take over all of Europe. They are saying it. That's what they think, or at the very least, that's what they say they think. And I'm looking at them like they're out of their minds. Russia had like 150,000 troops that went into Ukraine. This idea that 150,000 troops was going to take over all of Europe was always nonsense. And it's nonsense on its face, just on math, right? And yet they whipped up a fervor as if, oh my God, Putin is about to take it all. Do they actually believe that? I look, sometimes when I'm looking at TV, I can't tell if they're lying or if they just are idiots. What's the truth here? Does Europe really believe that Vladimir Putin is trying to take over all of Europe? And look, and I'm saying this to say, if that was their thought, allowing him to build his military to a million men that are battle hardened was not necessarily the best solution if they really did have this kind of fear of Russia. What's the reality of this?
well, it's part of ideology on one end and political survival on the other. Ideology, why? Because the European Union project is predicated on the abolition of nation state, and so they don't really favor promoting national interest of its own constituents, and they aim to create some kind of off-world, disconnected from its member parts of its own
Right.
constituting parts entity, a supra mega national supra-state, supranational state, i.e., the EU, a bunch of unelected, grayish politburo of some kind. And this was never more better summed up than a former Soviet dissident who, back in '04, basically said, "I lived in your future and it doesn't work." And this is what we have now. It's not a coincidence that some of those EU commissioners are former apparatchik from uh,
Soviet
Eastern
Union.
Bloc
Yeah.
countries, Eastern Europe countries. That's on the east, and on the west, for the Western countries, they are former Trotskyites. Manuel Barroso, one of the former EU commissioner, president of the EU Commission, he's a former Trotskyite. Many of them are former, far, far, far left. and they somehow normalize themselves, which is interesting because the green in Germany, which we tend to say, green on the outside, red on the inside, like a watermelon, are some of the most pro-war, anti-Russia, anti-national ideological formation that you see pretty much in power in Europe. And they never used to be like this. I mean, their forefathers back in the 1980s were genuinely pro-peace. Let's recall that they were featured prominently in the marches in Germany back in the 80s against the establishment of US Pershing missiles, intermediate missiles. And now we find people like Annabella Baerbock and her political party in position of responsibilities. And there's almost no more aggressive than those people. At the same time, they are let's call it what it is. I mean, they're idiots. They really
Yeah.
feel like you really feel like they scrap the bottom of the barrel, to plug those people and install them in position of. So they function as a sect. That's the old Trotskyite, method, and so they don't suffer any deviation of thought. And at the same time, because they are incompetent and because the facts are stubborn, and Europe as a construct, their political construct, is becoming completely irrelevant on the world stage, almost like the odd man out. Let's call it this way. And you were right to somewhat allude to it in your introduction. I think the speech of J.D. Vance really, really threw them into an apoplectic state. Because for the first time, someone with a platform which they can't really go out and criticize is the vice president of the US, whether or not their candidate won. Is the US VP, and he comes out swinging and basically tells them, "You guys are chasing shadows.
Yeah.
China, Russia. It's ridiculous. The problem is you. You
Yeah.
have to look inward. And your own people are completely, subjected to your lunacy. And there's no free speech, which is completely against the grain of what Europe used to be about.
Right.
The last few days, they've shown on CBS on 60 Minutes that raids throughout Germany at 6:01 a.m., knocking on people's doors for a meme posted on social networks, social platforms. Don't where at the same time you have people knifing, like on the loose, illegals knifing, Germans in the street or rolling over them in with a vehicle, ramming through, crowds. So it's becoming too difficult for for them to ignore, and they just don't know what to do. They used to have, the also the what Mike Benz called the censorship complex
Hmm.
to allow them to get away with enormities, and now this whole thing is being dismantled as we speak. I mean, every single day it's an avalanche of revelations, and the numbers of monies, taxpayers' monies, that is. They're not like philanthropist monies, to name but a few. We thought for a long time the guy was paying out of his own pocket, out of principle. No, he was actually using his structure to somewhat dress up, a pilfering of taxpayers. And what's been going on in the US since 2015, this is about the time when Mike Pence situated, the turning inward of NATO structure, including the censorship complex against their own population. This has been going on for, I mean, on steroids for at least close to 10 years now.
Hmm.
And we've seen it, we've all felt it, this crackdown on any kind of, and this idea that on certain topics, to the extent you remotely bring in, a keyword, it's almost like an algorithm. Automatically, you have this protocol being deployed against you. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're what have you. And now we're finding out the conspiracy theorists were right. And so they're back into a corner. That's really what it is. And they're gesticulating, trying to remain relevant. And in politics, it's the art of the movement. The extent you are not able to fill the space and create your next sequence, because it's also predicated on a lot of media perception. Um,
What do
that
you think?
you're done.
Well, I was asking, what do you think these meetings between Rubio and Lavrov are about? Like, what do you think they're discussing in that conversation in order to lead up to the meeting between Putin and Trump?
I think they're not going that to be that obsessed about Ukraine again. Of course, Ukraine is going to figure prominently because this is, the hot potato or the live grenade, as some people have been wont of saying recently, that we are dealing with right now. And the shelling of the Chernobyl NPP is another reminder that we've got a lunatic, on our hands, and the guy is just basically. I mean, if he was somewhat not tone deaf to what's going on, he would refrain from provocating, his U.S. sponsors, so to speak. I mean, he owes the U.S. his political life, this guy. And even though the mood is, we're going to be talking to the Russians, and it would behoove you to somehow take this into account and stop, trying to double down on the conflict in any aspect of it. The guy just goes out and creates, incidents which could have ramification for the whole of Europe. I mean, Chernobyl is, we all recall what happened in '86. It spread out all over Europe, the wind through the winds. But he's still going with this sole ammo of trying to say, the Russian did it. Why would the Russian have any interest? They're about to get, credible partners to sit down and resolve this thing, and they're going to do this. It's almost like the Assad thing, with the chemical weapon attack. The guy is basically has secured 80+% of the land that he's presiding over, and now he's going to resort to attack, spraying chemicals against his own population. I mean, but they believe those things. This is the thing. This is what makes those people dangerous, is that they are completely devoid of any imagination, and they resort to the same old, tried out method to try to say, no, look, this is what I told you all about. It's quite worrying, if you ask me.
But Zelensky has been sidelined in this conversation. So is Europe, by the way. I mean, in fact, Kellogg's pointed out that his job is to babysit Europe, which is the funniest thing in the world to me. That it's like he's pointing out, yeah, we knew Europe was going to complain. And so I'm here to have this conversation with Europe to allow them
to massage it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
To massage them,
fascinating.
yes.
It's so wild to me that that's his job,
Yes.
right? Because people initially were complaining, okay, if Trump is trying to end the war, Kellogg is not the guy to do it. And then
No,
we find out that Kellogg is not at talks in Riyadh. Kellogg is talking to
he's
Europe.
not.
What is it called? Wiskoff, I believe. I think I might be getting his
Hmm.
name wrong. And Rubio is having those talks. And so clearly Europe is not in the conversation regarding what is going to take place in Ukraine. I was playing this British guy who's a journalist and effectively said the bastards are going to do it. They're going to do it anyway. Effectively saying they're doing this over Ukraine's head and they're doing this over Europe's head. So European security won't be decided by Europe. It will be decided by Russia and America. That is fascinating. Ukraine is from somebody, I'm going to take it because it's a great language use, a chip on the table. That it's not the mainstay. The mainstay is a security framework that for Europe that works and that works into the future. I'm fascinated by that. Like, how is Moscow taking this? Like, are they taking this with skepticism? Are they taking this with he seems to be a partner? Like, what's the media in Moscow saying about these conversations by Trump, or at the very least the things that Trump has been saying, and for that matter, the meetings that are taking place in Riyadh?
Well, I think the Russians understand Trump's personality, and they can kind of part parse through what he says. He will say a lot of things, often completely unhinged sounding like. But they are more interested in what he does than what he says in that sense. So they always remain cautiously optimistic. I mean, obviously, they've gone through the Minsk one, Minsk two accord. They've seen, how brittle the word of from the West as a general concept is, and they will be making sure, if they know what's good for them, that mechanism put in place in the upcoming peace negotiation are such that the next U.S. administration, to the extent we get, some forces who are motivated to reignite the conflict in Ukraine, won't be able to get away with a narrative that favors, their ill intent. So we'll see. But Putin was really straightforward in last week's phone call to Trump as to the long-term security arrangement, as you mentioned, that needs to be implemented. The security arrangement would tend to basically see the US pulling out of Europe and allow the Europeans to basically do what they should have been doing 30 years ago, is forge their own way, and include Russia, because it should be a continental arrangement, and we should have a pan-European security system that stretches from Lisbon to Vladivostok. But with that current political class in place in Brussels, it's difficult to imagine, something along those lines. And Moscow is cognizant of this reality, and unfortunately, unless there's sudden changes in cascade, we may have to wait a while before adults, are able to access to the levels of responsibility there.
Okay, fair enough. I accept that. But it seems, or some of the reporting, is that NATO is on the table as a stick that the US can use in order to compel European behavior. Is that true? I mean, the UN security meeting, apparently, that they just had with Macron, Germany, Poland, etc., they're, like you said, gesticulating over what to do about the US doing this without them. I guess my thing is, does the US have leverage? Do they have a stick to force Europe? I mean, because the US is talking about normalization of relations. That includes eliminating sanctions. That includes giving the money back that we effectively stole. I would imagine that includes the SWIFT system. That includes all of those things, meaning all of that stuff is on the table, including Ukraine being one of the bargaining chips. Does Trump have the leverage to do what he wants to do in all of this, meaning in the war, normalize relations, etc.? And how does Europe take it if he does go through with it without him?
Well, I think the main leverage is basically the money, the financial leverage. I mean, if for starter they do not increase their contribution to NATO budget, the US, as he says, won't protect them. And creating a whole new security network for Europe, which would parallel NATO, would cost a bundle, which the Europeans simply do not have. And which would go completely against, common sense in terms of investments, in terms of spending, as a general matter. So I think we're just witnessing again posturing, essentially. But yes, the question of NATO is definitely on the table. Is this something that's relevant these days? And to the extent, we do not really have a new generation of disarmament treaties. That's, I think, the idea behind the Trump administration willingness to go fast, remove any kind of obstacle. So first deal with Ukraine in a satisfactory fashion to all parties involved, normalize as much as can be normalized with the Russian Federation. We have learned today that Coca-Cola is getting ready to re-enter the US market. So that's a big marker right there. All the Western brands are going to be coming in. This only needs to be negotiated. We're talking about a 1 billion ruble entry tag as far as the Russian side is concerned. So yes, I think those things are going to go fast. We have also learned today that U.S. firms' withdrawal from the Russian markets have cost them no less than $300 billion in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I saw that.
So
Wow.
that's a lot of money. And with the Trump administration, it's all about the bottom line. When they want to do business, they want to cut deals. You know, this is really what this is all about for them. But most importantly, you need to lay the ground for this arms reduction framework, which Trump has alluded to. And I'm sure he's very serious about this because he wants to basically entice Russia and China, whom he expects to catch up in terms of quantity of nuclear weapons with the two top ones within
Mhm.
a few years, to be involved in a tripartite security disarmament framework, which would ultimately see the big three reduce their nuclear armament by 50%. This, mind you, while there are people talking in the U.S., I mean, at least before the election, about updating the nuclear arsenal. So we really find ourselves at a crossroad here. Do we want to commit financially for peace, or for war? you know,
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about hundreds, if not trillions of dollars, literally. And this is, I think, what he wants to create. And if he gets his way at the pace at which things are going, 4 years down the road, we could be looking at a completely different world, really.
Mhm.
So let's hope that this is something that starts moving apace. That's all we can hope for.
Do you see Russia and China doing that? I mean, the reality of it is Trump's, let's say, radical shift in foreign policy also means that radical shift can take place in the opposite direction. And for all of the positives associated with the president being able to do that, it also implicitly has the negative that a president can do that, if that makes sense, right? Like, he was able to effectively say, all right, we have a new foreign policy going forward, full stop. And everybody's head goes into a tailspin. Well, the next president could do the opposite. Russia and China has to know that the next president could do the opposite. So I guess the thing is, like, what are the guarantees that this is a new orthodoxy as opposed to this kind of flash in the pan diplomacy? Um, and certainly Russia has to know that that's true. If that makes sense, I hope that makes
Well,
sense.
well, you're right. There are no guarantees. That's why the deals have to be ironclad on a legal basis. The triggering mechanisms, which would basically point out to a party being in breach of the agreement, have to really be geared in such a way that to the extent Russia abides by its own obligation. And this would also disarm this notion that Russia wants to take over all of Europe,
Mhm.
right? So that's why they are so panicky, is that you can get this put on paper, within the because we want a security agreement, we want a security architecture put in place, as part of the resolving the Ukraine problem. So you could easily provide those guarantees to the European that all the talks they've been having, and this kind of putting forward Russia as the boogeyman, the ultimate boogeyman, is irrelevant. Now they should start focusing on economic policy development and mass unemployment and security for their citizens and civil liberties, which is something that is altogether another a challenge for them, since they have no legitimacy, and it's revealed, it will on top of it be revealed that they were lying about Russia for all those years to those people in Russia, in Europe, who still might have doubts about it. But yeah, those security guarantees, they can be implemented, at the on both level, U.S. and Russian. The personnel is extremely competent. They understand the situation on the terrain. They understand all the ramifications, and This is something that can be done. As far as any kind of denuclearization treaties, when we understand that we have enough to blow the planet 100 times over.
Several times.
Uh,
Yeah.
so it's a win-win situation for everyone.
Is Keir Starmer going to send troops into Ukraine?
I doubt it. With what troops? what, tro- what troops is he gonna use? No, I think this is all like for sure. It's all rhetorics. Like I say, it's we had this somewhat really weird summit in Paris,
Uh-huh.
unattended by two-thirds of those who were invited, trying to remain relevant. It is trying to remain relevant essentially, and it's really something to a sight to behold. How ridiculous this whole thing looks like. So Starmer is essentially a dead man walking politically. I mean, he has nothing to ride on as far as the UK public is concerned. So it's all posturing for those people who put him in place, essentially. Macron, same thing, trying to remain relevant, which doesn't mean that they are not somewhat, dangerous people. They are, because they're delusional. They are completely enamored with themselves, and they really think that by pulling their resources together, they can somehow put a wrench in the, uh, the larger process at work. But I think they're playing a dangerous game, and I think they might be doing this cognizant of the fact that they are on the chopping block, and at some point they will be directly targeted for regime change,
What does Putin
using
get? Oh, I'm sorry. No, please finish.
yes, because I mean I think in Washington we've decided that we've had enough with those people, and so we're not going to tolerate those electoral manipulations that have been going on for quite some years now and preventing legitimate parties in Europe to emerge and contribute to a new dynamic essentially. And so again, it's all about survival. They know that the wrecking ball is coming for them. They know that. Starmer knows it. Macron knows it. Schultz, knows it. We'll have to see what the election result will be next week, but they all know that, and with them, their ideology also, this post-national ideology. So we'll see what happens. It's not just them personally, it's the ideology that those people vehiculate as well that's on the chopping block.
I'm curious. What is Putin going to have to give in this negotiation to make this work? And I'm fascinated by the question because, for one, he has a military that's winning on the ground, and two, there's been a lot of, let's say, fantasy in what many of these European leaders have been saying. And so you can kind of, on some level, use that fantasy in part of the negotiations that you're having, since that's the fantasy that they themselves have created. I'm fascinated by that. Give me your take on this. What do you think Putin is going to have to give to make this negotiation work?
Well, two things. One, Putin keeps his cards really close to the vest. Second, uh, every single day Russia gets in a position where it really does not need to concede anything. Because the situation on the battlefield is the alpha and omega of any kind of analysis in this respect. But if I was to venture out, some kind of carrot and stick prognosis broadcasting, he, Putin could offer some kind of demilitarized access to the Black Sea for exports of areas of Ukraine under U.S. And or EU control. So Odessa would seem to be a good option. But again, this is a short window of opportunity for them to take. And if somehow they show themselves to be untractable, the Russian military is continuing its work, and at some point they will secure Odessa and therefore prevent any kind of access to the Black Sea from
Oh,
Western
wait a minute.
controlled
Wait a minute.
companies.
Moscow hasn't taken Odessa yet. So how can they
Yet.
negotiate with something they haven't taken?
Well, there's still plenty of time.
But see, that's just
Remember
it.
that we cannot have a process that does not include Ukraine, even notwithstanding Kellogg's massaging sessions going on in
Oh,
Kiev
so
right
you
now.
oh wow. So you're saying something else. You're saying effectively that Russia is going to want more than what is currently on the bargaining table, even parts of Ukraine that they consider to be Russian. So in any conversation, this idea of
That's not what
freezing.
I'm saying. What I'm
Okay.
saying is, if Russia does not see its security concerns addressed ab initio in the negotiating framework, which is being discussed as we speak right now,
Right.
Russia will continue doing on the ground everything that it can to secure those interests. And the securing of Odessa would come into those steps, obviously, because fundamentally the Black Sea can never be accessed by NATO. That would endanger, Russian security.
Hmm.
So, to the extent, again, a Ukrainian figurehead at some point is going to have to be integrated into the ongoing process, along with the European poodles. We still have to have an election and resolve the legal illegitimacy of Zelensky. So we need to have elections. Those things take time. And we're not looking at having an election being held in Ukraine until next summer, probably next summer. So right now, the front is about to burst. So the Russians are about to secure the ethnic Russian populated land of the ex-Ukraine. Once this is done, they can focus all their resources to going back and secure Odessa. So yes, there's no need
Uh,
to go very far west, more western.
yeah.
You go to the Dnieper and you stop. That's you've done the job. Now you
So
basically yes,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say. So you think that's effectively the line that
that's
Putin
the
is
line.
getting? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can keep Western Ukraine. Nobody needs Western Ukraine. The Russians don't want to find themselves in the Vietnam guerrilla. What for? You
Yeah.
want to secure the rights of the Russian-speaking ethnic Russian population. That was always the deal about, one of the main requirements of the Minsk Memorandum, later Minsk Accord, later Resolution 2202. We're going back to fundamentals here. And the special military operation is but a enforcement mechanism, which is implied in Resolution 2202, Annex 1, Paragraph 11. We just have to go to the resolution. And it says that every member party to this resolution and or a treaty is bound to take all possible measures to see that the spirit of the accord are accomplished and implemented to the fullest. That's why no one ever declared a war. It's not a war. It's an enforcement. It's a police enforcement, law enforcement operation. That's it.
It may not have started as a war, but when 1 million people are killed, I think it's a war, or at the very least are taken off the finish line. I know what you mean. I understand your point, and I accept it. Right, that this did not start off as a war. It started off as a special military operation. It's been inflamed into something else, which is why I want it to end. I find it to be a silly, and I don't mean silly in the sense. I don't want to call it silly. All of these people have lost their lives. I guess that's my point. And they've lost it for something that I can't define as a reason that's relevant to the lives lost. And so, and I hate the fact that my country was intimately involved in doing it because it wouldn't have happened otherwise. If the U.S. was not a party, one way or the other, this doesn't happen. And yeah, here we are.
The
Here
US
we
was
are.
not a party to it.
It wasn't a party to it, but it inflamed it. I mean, when you get Joe Biden, or for that matter, under Obama, and they're taking certain actions that are overthrowing the government of Ukraine. Okay, well, you've overthrown the
Are you
democratically
talking about
elected.
the Maidan? Yes, yes. I'm
Yeah,
talking about the Minsk
yeah,
Accords. Yes.
right, exactly. It just got worse, and they just made it worse. And it's wild to me now that after doing all of that, we're with you for as long as it takes. We're going to be here. Putin is about to take over all of Europe. That Trump on a dime is like, we're done. Not just done with us, we're done with Europe. We have our own concerns. We need to move and deal with China. That is fascinating. He is effectively leaving them the bag after 4 years, 5 years of U.S. policy being to make it worse, to make it worse, to make it worse. It's just astonishing to me. Does Europe have enough gusto in order to maintain this on their own?
Again, I don't think they do. Fundamentally, without U.S. involvement, support and promotion, this whole thing is not going anywhere. And
So
the
what are we
last 3
looking at?
years have demonstrated. What we're looking at is the two
It's
top adults, resolving it, and Europe being somehow placarded, with the language that's going to be included in the text of the treaty
agreement.
of the yeah.
Do you think Trump has enough force to push that through Congress? Because Russia is going to insist that it goes through Congress as an actual treaty. At least I think they
We'll
are.
see. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. That's why I think once Trump wants to move fast before the midterm elections, he knows that time is not on his side from now on. This thing has to be wrapped up as far as his own agenda is concerned by next fall. That's my take on it at the latest.
Oh,
After
I think
that,
it's
it
sooner.
becomes.
I think it's sooner. I mean, because they're saying Easter as a wrap-up date, that Trump effectively wants it to be done by Easter. Do you think that's even possible?
But again, we need to have Ukrainian elections first. We need
Yeah.
to have Ukraine to sign that deal, to be part of this deal. So we need to have someone who is legitimate to sign it. It cannot be Zelensky. Hence, we need elections. So this is the devil is in the details.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah, I suppose it is. I suppose it is. I want this war over with. And so the fact that he is making moves on it, to me, is fantastic. Democrats are in a weird space because they don't want to acknowledge that this war was stupid and that their team effectively backed, making it worse. It is very odd. Look, I'll tell you, in America, the political space is weird. Most Republicans are against the war in Ukraine. Most Americans are against the war in Ukraine. And that number has only gotten higher and higher and higher to be against the war and Zelensky himself. So Trump has the political space to do whatever he wants on this. And he is uniquely qualified to flim-flam on questions of, are you letting Putin win? Right? Because that's the way it's going to be cast. You're letting Putin win. You're giving Putin everything that he wants. And, after talking to Mark's thing is there's no way an American president is going to be able to accept the terms that Russia is going to lay down in order to end the conflict. I don't think that's true, by the way. I do think that American president would take it, especially if he just doesn't care about it. Meaning Trump doesn't care about Ukraine. So from his point of view, I just want this over with. However, it's over with. At least that's the way I think it's being framed. Even though he is going to want a face-saving mechanism built into whatever takes place. So he's going to want something out of it. And I guess my question is, what is that thing out of it in real terms that he's going to be able to get to save face for whatever deal he comes up with? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. We got somewhat of an inkling of this is the discussion or those kind of statements being exchanged between Kiev and Washington on the possibility of the U.S. to take over most of the minerals there. They're going to pay themselves on the market. But that's an issue between Zelensky and, Zelensky, no, not even Zelensky is not, again, but that's for them to resolve the legality of this. But between Kiev and Washington, that's basically it. Washington's going to take everything it needs and some. It's got to be at least, if we understand, if we go by the figure put forward by Trump, 500 billion worth of minerals. That's roughly 3 times the amount that the U.S. has invested
on the war. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your point is that it's not between Putin and Trump. I see what you mean. Your point is, well, it's not about what Trump gets out of Putin. It's what Trump sells to the American public as we recouped the money for the war. So we're ending this. Oh, interesting. Interesting. That is super interesting. We'll see if that works, or we'll see if he goes that route. You're right. He is effectively saying we're taking the minerals. we're this is a shakedown.
We
We're
own
gonna
you, booty. We own you.
right
You are our.
now. Zelensky has said we're not excited. He has thrown a hissy fit, and he has effectively said we're not accepting anything that they negotiate without us being involved, without me being involved. Because let's be honest, he's talking about himself. I mean, is that true? Like I keep to me, it's like, dude, if we pull out, that's it. Is he right that he can gum up the works in this process if he doesn't accept whatever they come up with?
Well, how could he be able to have the standing to either accept, endorse, and or reject anything that's being talked about when he's not even legitimate?
Yeah.
So whatever, in other words, whatever this guy says between two lines of coke, nobody cares. He's a non-entity. He's just a clown, whirling in the wind, and he's not getting funnier by the day, by the way. And if I were him, I would be actually cautious about my own security now, because there are talks about, a coup against him, or, at least attempts on his life within Ukraine. This was reported last week by, I think, a Ukrainian parliamentarian figure. So if I were him, I would somehow refrain from making inflammatory statements the way he's been doing it. And most importantly, I would refrain from engaging in nuclear blackmail.
Yeah.
Yes. Because at some point, no one, I think, wants to go out of, and take him out. But if he keeps acting like this, he might just have only himself to blame. Of course, it will be made to look like internal score settling, but these days they can make anything look like it's internal.
Oh, you're saying Moscow takes out Zelensky? Is that what you're saying?
No, not Moscow. I think.
Oh, you're talking about his
Washington.
internally. Oh, you're talking about Washington. If he
Yeah,
stays in a way, of a deal.
yeah. Because you don't cross you don't cross the master. The master has said, "Time out. We're done with this." So why you keep yapping around like what we're saying? Are you tone deaf, man? What's going on with you?
I know you're
You've
an
been a good
analyst.
actor up until then. Keep acting. Keep being a good poodle.
I know you're an analyst when you're looking at this, but are you hopeful in this? And I'm asking, I know that's a weird question to ask because hope doesn't really play into it. But if you're looking at Russian media, they are growing right now. It may, if not indeed in spirit, in the way that they're talking about this. And there seems to be an alignment in regards to what Russia is saying about it and what the US is saying about it in regards to, let's say, the potential to do something big. Where do you stand on this potential of this? And do you have, I guess, a deep-seated sense of something? Even if that something is just, yes, I do hope this goes well.
Well, you have to be hopeful. You have to be optimistic, and you have to not allow those thoughts to percolate through your mind. I'm saying if you're in a position of responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So those people, like I said, and we'll, I guess, close on this. I'll go back to what I said initially: is keep in mind this is the first time, and on that level, that the two countries are talking for years, while the world was basically falling apart. Had you asked me that question, let's say 4 years ago, I would have been somewhat pessimistic that things would not unravel, to I would say, a point of no return. But somehow we managed to make it through those 4 years, and now we have again the willingness to sit down and discuss things on the merits. And so from that point on, it's the work left up to negotiators and diplomats.
Arnaud, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Arnaud, Deverley. He is Delverley, I'm sorry. He is an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law and participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein, along with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and Fracturing of American Political Consensus. Arnold, man, thank you for this. You have a good day.
Thank you, Jamal.
All right. I am, look, like I said, I'm fascinated. My mind is somewhat blown in regards to the fact that these relations are taking place. I was at the Biden-Putin summit, as I've pointed out before. And at that summit, there was a mirroring of communications coming out between Biden and Putin. It broke down quickly within a few months. They were supposed to have meetings. They're supposed to have open communication channels, all that stuff. They may have had back channel communications, but those communications seemed to break down in regards to actual talking between Moscow and the United States. This time around, they're meeting with a different intent. The intent in this case is, how do we partition the world in a way that does not bring us back into conflict, and more importantly, does not bring us into conflict? Symbol for that is Ukraine and negotiations around Ukraine. The reporting that's coming out is Ukraine is a chip on the table, not the singular issue. That there are other issues that they're talking about in regards to normalization of ties between the United States and between Moscow. And the framework of that conversation is being set between Rubio and Lavrov, meeting right now in Riyadh, with the belief being that once the framework of the conversation is set, that Putin and Trump would meet in Riyadh to continue those discussions and those conversations. Europe wasn't allowed. Zelensky wasn't allowed, because for all intents and purposes, they don't add anything to that conversation. What really boils down to is that this was being pushed and inflamed by the U.S., and so the U.S. is going to take the lead role in ending it. The moment that the U.S. money stops, then the catch becomes, okay, well, what does Europe do? Now, the budgets in Europe, if you're looking at Paris, if you're looking at Germany, if you're looking at the big states, are already under stress. The German government literally collapsed as a result of giving money to Ukraine, because at some point, one of the members of the coalition asked the most operative question in the world: what are we getting for the money? Is it going to somehow change realities on the ground? And if not, why are we continuously giving the money? Perfect question. Schultz wanted to keep the money going. Members of the coalition did not. Government collapses. Macron does not even have a governing coalition. So the idea that France is going to somehow take the lead in this seems to be ludicrous to me. And as I pointed out, the German government is in shambles. So what is Europe going to do when America pulls out? And the answer seems to be complain. They're going to complain, which is why Kellogg is there having a conversation with them, while the adults figure out what does European security look like going forward. And even further, what does the U.S.-Russia relationship look like going forward? Is the U.S. going to pull back on the SWIFT system issue? Is the U.S. going to give back the $300 billion that it stole? Meaning, what is it going to be like between the U.S. and Russia? And it seems that some of that conversation goes into companies going back into Russia, Russia getting its money back. Kellogg brought up the relationship between North Korea and China. Okay, that's nonsense. That's not going to be part of the real conversation. And if it is things told in order to grease the wheels, not something that is going to change immaterial reality. Truth be told, if you look at the speed at which Trump is moving, that also means that speed can be made in order to make the relationship worse when Trump is gone. So Moscow, under no circumstance, is going to change its relationships with China, North Korea, the BRICS nations, any of that stuff, because they know that just as quickly as this has been going, it can quickly go away. But putting that to the side, I think what Trump is seeing is that the world is getting more complicated and that the US position in that world is edging away. And that if indeed we continue with the sanctions, we continue with the weaponization of the dollar, that these countries are effectively going to say it is more of a headache to use the dollar because of the threats that can be made with that same dollar the moment that you use the dollar. So let's try to find something else. Meaning, a lot of this is in response to economic realities of BRICS. It is something that Trump mentioned during the election, and it is something that the Democrats did, even though it was a clear reality that we, as the US, is dealing with. If you have deals that all of these countries, let's say you have country after country after country decide we're dropping the dollar. Okay, well, what does it mean to the US position in the world if the US dollar is no longer the reserve currency? It means a big deal. It means a hell of a big deal. How do you pay back $35 trillion in debt when people stop using your money? Now, is Trump going to be able to do anything about this? No. The boat, that train is gone. We've shown ourselves to be dishonest actors in the way that we've used the dollar as a weapon. We're stuck with that. Trump is trying to lessen the bleed. Can he do it? I'm doubtful. But he's going to try. And he thinks that doing so, you have to start with Russia because Russia's the mover and shaker behind this idea that we need to de-dollarize. They've used the dollar as a weapon. They've stolen money from us. They have trillions of dollars that they've printed out of the blue. We can't allow this instrument, this monetary instrument, to be continuously used as a weapon like this. We need to de-dollarize. Trump knows that that's the Russian position because Russia has effectively made that point clear that that's their position. So in his mind, if we normalize relations, the speed that goes, the need for Russia to do that lessens. It's so, I get it. It's not rah rah, we love the Russians. It's we are dealing with real world realities that many of these people have been living in a fantasy land, hasn't brought up, hasn't cared about. And so this is where we are. I'm fascinated by this. I legitimately am. And I am one of those people that is hopeful that something good comes out of this that puts to bed this nonsense. How Europe responds, who knows? Are they going to complain? Yes. Can they do anything about it? Doubtful. But you never know. They may find some kind of way to screw up the process. We'll see. Let's see. Chat, what is happening? Chat, I'm trying to be cognizant that my chat exists when I'm doing this video since it's live. What is that? Thoughts and prayers. Let's see right here. Banks are even developing in Babylon. Banks are everywhere. Baldwin Blues. I love that one. So the behavioral hospital of a people doesn't matter. Okay, the chat is in its own world. Robbie Shmuley is syphilis in human form. Yes, he is. He is. And a grotesque poxma. Yes, he's a disgusting human being. Adrian Dickman. Rupert told me you were a Knight of Malta. Okay, I don't know what that one is. That other guy told me, okay, the chat is in its own world. The chat is in its own world. Here's one. Papa Onaya Shelley. Good morning, Jamal. Good morning back at you, Papa Onaya Shelley. Caleb Maupin is coming up shortly. And I'm going to get his take on these events also. Keep in mind, Caleb is the one that had the event in DC. This freezing, frigid, brutally cold inauguration that took place in DC. Yeah, I'm saying that because it was freezing. But fantastic event. And Caleb made this idea of a peace bridge that we don't need to be at odds. We can come to conclusions. You may not like Trump, but at the very least acknowledge the things that he's doing right. He may do those things more. And if he's trying to make peace, then that is indeed a good thing. And Caleb is with me right now, my man.
Hey.
Caleb, how you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm good.
Just to give a heads up, Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. I'm I keep saying his new book. We're gonna have to change that. But Kayla, what is your latest book?
It's called "The Killing of Brian Thompson and the Danger of an American Years of Lead," and Amazon made me change the title to just "An American Years of Lead: The Danger of an American Years of Lead." But it's about the Luigi Mangione case, and the way the media has covered that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's my latest book.
So tell me, conversations are taking place in Riyadh between Russia and the United States. Europe and Zelensky have been sidelined. They have been throwing a hissy fit. Apparently, they had a quote emergency summit. Germany, France, the UK, etc., etc. Give me your take on these talks. What are your thoughts in regards to, and I'm leaving that question broad because I want you to go wherever you want to go with it. But what are your conversations? What are your thoughts on the talks that are taking place between Russia and the US?
I'm holding my breath. I mean, we are really close to a really big development, and there's so much taking place in the background. I don't know if you've seen, but the reports seem to indicate that Visa and MasterCard are very soon going to be accessible in Russia once
Right.
again. In addition to that, we have seen a number of Russians or Americans who've been arrested in Russia have been released. And Marco Rubio is in Saudi Arabia, and the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he's in Saudi Arabia, and it appears that Trump has said very soon he could be meeting with Russian President Putin. He said it's likely to happen very soon. We're in a really good situation where this war could finally come to an end, and we have Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth basically warning everyone that Russia will declare victory, because they will, and that'll be used to attack the Trump administration. And he's saying, look, Russia's going to declare victory no matter what, so just prepare for that. And it looks like we could see an end to the hostilities in Ukraine. We could see a border being drawn that is to the agreement of all parties that would, end the killing. And Ukraine is lashing out like crazy with rage. Zelensky is saying crazy things. And we saw the Ukrainians actually sent 7 drones to attack an oil storage facility in Kazakhstan run by an American oil company. And so Ukraine is lashing out like crazy. I would fit this in with that presidential assassination attempt from Ryan Roth, the Ukrainiac, the deranged individual who went to fight in Ukraine and then came back to the United States and tried to kill President Donald Trump. I associate what he did with the Ukrainian government and their networks. Maybe that's conspiratorial. But at the same time, I mean, if you look at it, the fact that this crazy American citizen with a very serious criminal record went over to Ukraine, got involved in recruiting Ukrainian fighters from around the world, according to his own statements, involved with the U.S. State Department in doing so, then comes back to the United States and tries to kill President Trump. That makes me think that the Ukrainian apparatus very much sees Trump as a threat to them. And I think there's a very good chance that we could see Donald Trump deliver on his campaign promise and end this conflict. And I really hope that is the case, but we're in the moments where I feel like everything that happens in the next week could make a really, really big difference. And we're very close. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen now. And I feel like if this fails, it'll be a disaster. It'll be very hard to get back to the spot that we're in. And I really, really hope we can get peace.
I agree with you 1,000%. And I guess I feel the same way. All of these people are being killed, and I can't necessarily come up with a good reason as to why. What do you think this conversation is ultimately about? Like, meaning, from my understanding, some of the reports have come out that said Ukraine is a chip on the table. It's not the main thing. It's one of many things that they're having a conversation about in regards to this kind of normalization of relationship between the two countries. What do you think that means in real terms in regards to the conversation they're having?
Well, I think that is just an acknowledgement of the fact this war has never really been about Ukraine. It's been about Russia, and it's about the fact that Russia wants to be a major player in the world economy. As the large country that Russia is, the major exporter of oil and gas, Russia is a major player. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, they were devastated economically, but they restored themselves after a decade or so of economic looting by a president who was installed by the United States, Boris Yeltsin, who the USA meddled in Russia's elections like crazy in 1996 to make sure that Boris Yeltsin won the re-election. There's a cover of Time magazine about this. There's even a documentary about this. The USA worked overtime to make sure that Gennady Zhuganov of the Communist Party didn't win the election in Russia, but rather the election was won by Boris Yeltsin, who wrecked their economy. But after Boris Yeltsin, you had the rise of Russian President Putin, who restored Russia's economic strength by reasserting state control over oil and gas and using the oil and gas revenues to stabilize the economy and rebuild the industrial base of Russia. And he's been making sure that Russia can continue to rise and operate as a key player on the global stage, as a modern industrial power, as a country with millions of people in it, with a strong economy. And the Western former colonial powers, the NATO countries, Britain, France, Germany, etc., they don't want Russia to be that. They want Russia to be down and out. They want Russia to be impoverished, but they don't want Russia to be an equal player at the global stage. They don't like Russia competing with them on the oil and gas markets. They don't like Russia, having influence throughout the region, throughout Central Asia, throughout Eastern Europe. And so because of that, Russia has had to basically fight to just to kind of acknowledge its existence. When I was in Russia, there's a number of people that I met who are like, why can't we just be a normal country? Why aren't we allowed to just be a country like any other? And that's because the Western colonial powers don't acknowledge their right to exist. They don't have the right to be a country. And the war in Ukraine is just an extension of this kind of effort to prevent Russia from being an equal, country on the global stage. And that, the USA overthrew the Ukrainian government in 2014, installed a fanatically anti-Russian government, that then proceeded to start bombing the people in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, and killing them, and to the point that Russia felt it had to move in and protect the people of the republics that had declared independence in 2014. There's no question that there were these bio labs that were being developed. And I tell people how wild it is. We in the United States, the United States said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. It didn't. That was a lie. And Iraq is on the other side of the planet. And so based on a lie that a country on the other side of the planet might have weapons of mass destruction, the USA invaded Iraq and killed hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Well, here we have a situation where there's a country right on Russia's border that is actually developing chemical and biological weapons right on their border. And the U.S. government, their major partner, admits they're doing this. Victoria Nuland said this on the floor of Congress with Marco Rubio. They are developing chemical and biological weapons, no question about it. And they're right on Russia's border. And then there's people that are sympathetic to Russia who are being bombed and killed and have kind of declared independence from the country. And under those circumstances, Russia felt they had to move in to protect these folks. And we know the USA worked very, very hard to provoke this. This was very similar to the Afghan trap of the 1980s, where Zelensky did everything he could to provoke a situation where the Soviet Union felt it had to move into Afghanistan. And then they used the conflict in Afghanistan to drain the Soviet Union economically, et cetera. They're doing the same kind of thing. They want Russia to pay a heavy cost in Ukraine, and they want to demoralize the Russian people. They want to weaken the Russian economy. They want to use this as an excuse to further isolate Russia economically around the world. And all of that has failed. These talks are taking place in Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia was asked by the Biden administration, hey, we need you to cut off Russia. We need you to cut off Russia because they attacked Ukraine. So therefore, they've got to be just completely locked out, impose sanctions. And the Saudi crown prince said, no, we're not going to do that. And the reason is because Saudi Arabia is a huge oil exporting country. And the amount of oil they put out really has an impact on the price. And Russia is also a huge oil exporting country. And so Russia and Saudi Arabia, they need to be able to call each other. The crown prince needs to be able to call up Putin and say, look, we're putting out this many barrels of oil today. What are you going to do? Because that has a huge impact on the global economy. And if Saudi Arabia had gone along with the United States and just cut off Russia as Biden expected that they would do, that would be a huge loss for Saudi Arabia, and it would prevent them from having necessary relations when it comes to oil prices. So Saudi Arabia, frankly, just said no. India did the same thing, right? India, USA demanded, all right, India, we want you to just cut off Russia. And India's like, no, we're not going to do that. And a number of countries that the United States expected would just comply with their effort to just completely isolate Russia refused to go along with it. And the Biden administration, I mean, we've spent billions and billions of dollars, all kinds of weaponry. But when it really gets down to it, Russia's not destroyed economically. I was just over there last March and I saw how much the population is rallying behind the government, how popular the Russian president is, how much support there is for the military operation. Russia's not going to submit, and Trump realizes that, and the American people realize that. The American people are not enthusiastic about continuing this. And so I'm hoping that common sense will prevail and we can see a peace treaty, and Zelensky will be forced to accept it because he's never really been a sovereign leader. Ukraine is not an independent country. Let's just get this idea that Russia is attacking an independent country. No, Ukraine lost its independence. It has a government that is a front for NATO. Zelensky was elected on a peace platform, and then he got into office and realized he didn't have the power to set the policy. The policy was being set by the NATO generals who were installed in the 2014 coup. Ukraine is not a sovereign country. It is a vehicle through which Russia can be attacked. It is a vehicle, a proxy of NATO. Through which Russia can be antagonized, and the neutral president was removed in 2014 to make sure that it played that role. So I'm hoping that we can see negotiations leading toward a de-escalation of hostilities. That would be good for Ukraine. All these people that claim to care about Ukraine, well, you don't care about Ukraine by wanting their people to keep dying, and they're dragging every old man and young boy off the street. It's really horrendous in Ukraine right now. If you care about Ukraine, you should want a peace deal to happen. You should be an enthusiastic supporter of the negotiations.
I agree with you. Everything that just came out of your mouth, you have my full agreement with. I'm curious, why do you think Trump is, I don't get the sense that Trump is in love with Putin, and yet he is moving very fast in order to try to get a deal to end the conflict. Why do you think the U.S. has taken this position now, especially coming from the right? Like, as I point out to my audience, I feel myself, I'm in a weird space. I find myself to be firmly on the left in a policy sense. And in being an honest actor on the left who cares about things like healthcare, education, etc., I also care about things of war. I don't like this idea that all of these people died for no reason. This was a nonsense conflict. It didn't need to happen, and yet here we are. And so why do you think that Trump is moving on this now?
Well, I'll tell you, I have done a deep dive recently into, of all people, Paula White Cain, who is Donald Trump's spiritual advisor, who's been put as the head of the White House Faith Office. And I looked into Paula White Cain, who is Donald Trump's personal friend, his advisor. And I looked into her, and if you listen to her preaching, it's all about the power of the personal will, like personal willpower and spiritual willpower, and the prosperity gospel, the idea that that you can grow and expand, and that Donald Trump is a businessman, and that he grew up in the church of Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. If you ever hear that cliche, is the glass half empty or half full? That's Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, and that Donald Trump is a businessman, and he believes that if you work hard and if you have a vision and you go out and build and construct, you can make lots of money. He believes in the American dream, right? Go out and achieve your dreams and work really hard and have a vision and be positive, and all these kind of American cliches that are associated with the American kind of free market perspective. That's what Donald Trump believes, and Donald Trump's coalition are millionaires and billionaires who believe that, right? Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, right? I mean, he's a guy who was struggling with cocaine addiction, got over his addiction, had an idea about how to design a pillow, started a company, and has made millions of dollars designing pillows. The Hobby Lobby store, right? It's a chain of craft stores throughout the Midwest that's, owned by a family. They've made millions of dollars, and they're conservative, and they're small business owners. And if you look at it, Donald Trump's coalition tends to be rich people that are not part of the club. And when I talk about the club, I'm talking about, the old money entrenched power that is tied in with London, the Anglo-American establishment, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the Mellons, the big New England banking elites that are really in with the intelligence community, that are really in with the British, and those folks have a different perspective. They have much more of a managerial perspective. When we hear the stuff coming out from the World Economic Forum, and they're talking about overpopulation, and they're talking about kind of a managerial scheme, they're thinking long term. How do we save our system? How do we make sure that the Western colonial powers stay at the top of the world, and the big Wall Street banks and London's we can dominate the world? And how can we utilize the government to assert control over the entire world, but also over our own population? How can we stay in power in the long term? They're a managerial elite, but the bulk of American capitalists and business owners are not part of this club, and they resent that. And they don't want regulations, because those regulations are not going to be written by them. They're going to be written by the ultra monopolies. And so Donald Trump represents the bulk of American capitalists who resent the American government for regulating the economy. They want deregulation, and they really believe in the American dream: work hard, and what is the new thing that they say? Manifest, right? If you could manifest your achievement, right? I mean, that's what they believe. And Donald Trump believes that. And Russia is a country that basically, in an international sense, has pulled itself up by its bootstraps. They were down and out in the 90s, but they took control of their economy. They had a president who's a builder and took control of their oil and gas, and made lots of money with oil and gas, and used that money to rebuild their industrial sector and lift people out of poverty. And it's a similar kind of thing. And that really the fight in the world today is between the growing sectors of the economy that are growth oriented, that believe in growth, and the Wall Street, London speculation economy that is about the dominance of bankers, and the managerial schemes those bankers want to impose in order to maintain their power. And Donald Trump is ripping apart the U.S. state right now. I mean, they're firing IRS agents. They're getting rid of the USAID, the FBI, because this is Donald Trump on behalf of people like Elon Musk, and people like Hobby Lobby and Mike Lindell and and they're trying to rip apart the regulatory agencies that write the rules that get in the way of these, kind of lower level capitalists. And he's trying to put in division what Paula Kane Whites believes. He wants to create America, a country where if you just work hard, you can make lots of money, and there's no big government to get in the way. He believes that. And as Russia is a country that's trying to pull itself up and build and construct and align itself with African countries and independent countries that are doing a similar thing, there's a common interest and there's a common vision that we can see economic growth. Whereas the old money establishment wants to heavily regulate things in order to maintain their dominance. And so Donald Trump, there's a common interest, and he may not even realize it on the level that I'm laying it out here. I hope he does. But there's a common interest in that Russia is pro-growth, and the layer of American business owners who are aligned with Trump are pro-growth, and the imperialist world order, globalism, imperialism, the Wall Street, London, global financial system is anti-growth. And that's what it really gets down to. And that, look, when Donald Trump went to North Korea and met with Kim Jong-un, one of his biggest supporters was Jim Rogers, who, I mean, I actually met him. He came to the RT studio one time. He's a business owner, and he lives in Singapore. And why was he a big supporter of Trump going to North Korea? He said, I want to make money in North Korea. There's a lot of money to be made in North Korea. Most North Koreans can speak more than one language. Those mountains are full of minerals. They're already making their own cell phones in-house. Why shouldn't we Americans find a way that we can make money off of North Korea? North Korea wants to grow. We need to make money. Let's do it. But the establishment, the intelligence apparatus, in particular John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, who've both had their security clearances stripped away by the Trump
revoked. Yeah.
They sabotaged Donald Trump's ability to restore relations and make peace with North Korea. And that there's kind of a push and pull. There's a lot of American business owners that just want to make money, and they see this new BRICS economy that's emerging as a great opportunity to make money. And the idea, we have to hate them because they're not part of the club and they're authoritarian regimes and all, they don't care about that. They're thinking, like, our economy in the West isn't doing too well. We could make money trading with Russia and China and India and North Korea and Vietnam and Venezuela, and why not? And they're just not part of this, this agenda of trying to maintain the dominance of the Western system. And that's why I think that's really what I think is happening. And that doesn't mean everything Trump does is necessarily good, but I'm telling you, there's a big division among our elite. And Donald Trump represents the section that is less in favor of the march toward World War III, less in favor of the emerging low-wage police state, and more in favor of economic growth. And that's why I think that his election was a great step forward. And I think that what's happening now is full of potential because there's a division of economic interest between different factions of our elite. And Donald Trump represents a section of our elite that just doesn't see opposing Russia and beating down all the countries aligned with Russia around the world as in their interest.
And you're saying this is a lefty, that basically this was a good step forward. There will be a lot of lefties that will set themselves on fire to hear that.
Well, and where I disagree with Trump and Elon Musk, I'll just be real, is I don't think that just getting the government out of the economy is going to create economic growth. I mean, I'm certainly happy to see the FBI and CIA ripped apart, but getting rid of all these good paying federal employee jobs, I mean, that's a lot of money that's going to go into the U.S. economy, right? Those people are making six-figure salaries, and they're spending that money on houses and cars and all of that. And getting rid of all of that, that's spending that just goes out of the economy. And that, unfortunately, I think while Trump believes in growth and while he very much has this positive attitude that ties in with his spiritual beliefs and all of that, at the same time, he believes in this economic philosophy, this libertarian Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand economics that says you can cut your way into economic growth. Well, I would respectfully say you can't cut your way into economic growth. And how was Russia able to rebuild itself after the fall of the Soviet Union? They asserted state control over their natural resources and used that money to build, to subsidize and plan out the economy. And if you look at how China has been able to build itself up after the century of humiliation, it's been through asserting state control and central planning. They have 5-year economic plans, and that I'm pro-growth. And that's what socialism and communism historically have always been, pro-growth, build, construct 5-year economic plans, mass mobilizations. I don't believe this growth is going to come from the free market. And ultimately, I think that if the people that are aligned with Trump realize, come to an understanding of the real situation, they're going to realize we need the same thing right here. Right now, we have a government in the United States that is a vehicle for the big monopolies to regulate their opponents out of existence, to maintain their control. And so a lot of people say we need to get that government, out of the way. Well, I think ultimately, not only do we need to get that government out of the way, we need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a strong popular state that will beat back the power of the big corporations and monopolies and put oil and gas under public ownership here and create a great national bank that will inject credit into the communities throughout the United States that are struggling, that will hire the unemployed to start building high-speed railway and start, working on fusion energy, and that we need a popular state that will beat back the power of the big monopolies to stabilize our economy. Ultimately, that's what we need in the United States. And it's going to be a difficult thing for the lower levels of capital, the Elon Musks of the world and the Mike Lindells of the world to understand that, because that goes against everything they believe. They believe in the free market ideology. But ultimately, if you look at what the Communist Party of the United States advocated back when it was a strong political organization before it was broken up after the end of the Second World War, they called for an anti-monopoly coalition, right? That's what they called for, an anti-monopoly coalition, a government that fought against the big monopolies that included, the working class, included small business owners, included even some of the rich and powerful that were against the monopolies that were driving toward militarism and a police state. And ultimately, that's what we need if we're going to defeat the drive toward World War III, if we're going to have peace around the world, if we're going to have economic rejuvenation, we need to create an anti-monopoly coalition in the United States. And that will ultimately be the solution to breaking up the globalist imperialist system and having a pro-growth economy in the United States. And that's ultimately what it's going to take, but it's not going to be something these people learn overnight. That's where this is coming from. I see a direct economic interest here. There is a pro-growth perspective, and there is opposition to the interests of the globalist imperialist monopolies. That's where all this is coming from, in my view.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. I take it that Donald Trump took this position because he's looking at the way the dollar is being used. He's looking at the way the countries are organizing against this kind of usage of the dollar as a weapon. That Russia was one of the main countries that was pushing for this notion of de-dollarization, and that if you could deal with Russia, you can undercut this movement towards de-dollarization, something that would be detrimental to the U.S. So I take it as Trump's view of this is more realistic in the way that he's looking at it, as opposed to, let's say, the Democrats that just wanted forever war, had no way out of the war, and wanted to effectively keep it going for, quote, as long as it takes. Do you think, give me your take on that?
Well, as far as the dollar, part of it is, during the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the USA had the ability to just destroy a country. And there were 3 countries that really suffered horrendously. Iraq, right? The USA put sanctions on them. And I think the death count is 1.2 million, died as a result of the fact that they couldn't get chlorine to treat their water. They couldn't, and I mean, you read the World Health Organization reported that the impact of the U.S. sanctions on Iraq, because the USA just locked them out of the world economy. They were devastated. And I mean, it set the stage for the eventual invasion of Iraq. The reason the USA was able to roll into Iraq and effectively destroy them so well in 2003 was because they had just spent a decade just destroying them with sanctions. Cuba was very badly devastated to the point they only had electricity for a few hours a day in Cuba in the 90s. It was very bad. North Korea, they had a food crisis because they couldn't, import oil to run their tractors, and that their food system, they had an independent, self-sufficient food system, but they needed oil to run those tractors. And in the 90s, the petrodollar, the USA was able to just, freeze North Korea's food production, basically. It was a devastating time in North Korea. And that was the 90s. And that's kind of the playbook that Victoria Nuland and the Biden administration are playing with. Oh, if some country gets in our way, we'll just roll right over them. We'll just lock them out of the world economy, and they'll just be devastated economically. And that's what they get for not doing what we say. Well, you can't do that anymore because now there's a whole new economy in the world that you can trade with. And so if you tell a country like they told North Korea in the 90s, you can't have dollars. And so North Korea says, okay, now we can't import oil, and now people starve to death. Well, nowadays, if you tell a country you can't have dollars, they say, okay, we'll get Chinese currency. We'll trade in something else. We'll use the ruble. We'll use and there's this whole other economy where if countries are locked out by the United States, they can just go elsewhere. It's weird. I mean, I feel like, our leaders can't be that stupid. Sometimes I would hear the Biden administration talk and other people in Washington, D.C. And I mean, there's even people in the Trump administration. I hear them talk, and it's like, you just want to slap them like, hello, for example, right? Venezuela and Iran are best pals, right? They get along great. Why? Because the USA has horrendous sanctions on Iran and horrendous sanctions on Venezuela. And so, Venezuela was having a food crisis. So they did business with Iran. And Iran, there's big Iranian supermarkets all over Venezuela and all of that. Well, the U.S. officials were up there. This must not happen. This can't happen. There cannot be Iranian food in Venezuela, and Iran and Venezuela can't be trading with each other. Well, you don't trade with them. You locked both countries out of the world economy. And so now they're trading with each other. Do you not understand this? If the USA wasn't trying to destroy Iran economically, if the USA wasn't trying to destroy Venezuela economically, they might be able to use that leverage to say to Venezuela or say to Iran, don't trade with the other one. But they've tried to destroy both countries and lock them both out of the economy. And so they're trading with each other now. That's how this works, right? I mean, if you kick 2 people out of the club and then they start and form their own club, without you, what right do you have to complain about it, right? But there's this kind of this entitlement that we have this a bit that they really do believe it's the 90s where they can just destroy a country, and if a country doesn't trade with them, then it's just devastated. That's not the way the global economy is, and if you realistically look at things, it's not realistic. And if the USA continues to operate as if it's the 1990s, maybe it's just a pride thing. But if you continue to operate as if it's the 1990s, this other alternative economy that countries are getting closer and closer to, and more people are trading with, is just going to get stronger, and we're going to get more and more isolated. And during the election, Donald Trump came out and said, look, the dollar, we could lose the dollar, and these sanctions that we've imposed around the world are making the dollar, eventually the dollar could fall as a result of this, and we'll all be a lot poorer because our currency will lose value. The US dollar is inflated because it's used in so many different countries, right? The more that a currency is used, the higher its value goes up.
Right.
And, the petrodollar, the fact that pretty much all oil transactions take place in the US dollar, the fact that the US dollar is used by a number of countries, that is a way that the US currency kind of has its value inflated. And that's why we have a somewhat high standard of living in the United States. And as these sanctions are imposed on countries, and as countries' ability to trade decreases, as countries don't get access to US dollars, as countries are locked out of US banks and US financial institutions, Russia right now is locked out of the SWIFT system, I believe, which is the main international bank transaction system. You do that, well, as a result, people just develop other currencies that they trade with, other systems. Russia and the BRICS countries have developed their own SWIFT system, their own. At this point, they're talking about how they've developed their own international banking, transaction system that they can just start using, and people just start taking their business elsewhere. And then your value and the value of the US dollar decreases. And that's really what's going on there. And I think Trump is just more of a realist. And again, he's not on board with, there is this feeling among a lot of the elite, in Washington. A lot of them are Rhodes Scholars. They go and they study they study in Britain, and there's the Council on Foreign Relations, and there's this ideology that they have. The West must stay at the top. The values of the West must be spread all over the world. And no, we just got to make sure that Russia and China don't keep rising. No, even if it costs us, even if it hurts our economy, we've got to be in a crusade for these Western values. We got to oppose these regimes. I don't think Donald Trump is on board with that. I don't think Donald Trump cares that much. Right? Yeah. I think Donald Trump just wants to see economic expansion happen. And so because of that, he's looking at this and he can just say it with a cool head. Look, if we keep doing this, our currency is going to lose its value. So let's just not. And then that makes them angry. Oh, no, you've got to do this. You got to do this. And he says, no, I don't have to do this. Right. I'm not part of this. He doesn't buy into the foreign policy establishment and their overall perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would imagine in these conversations that are taking place in Riyadh, in preparation for conversations that are taking place between Putin and Donald Trump, that the U.S. has something in mind in regards to what it wants from Putin. What do you think that is? Meaning, what do you think that when they shake hands, they say, we come to an agreement, this is what we're going to do for European security going forward. What does Putin give in that conversation from the standpoint of what Trump wants out of Putin in order for him to say, we've saved face, this works, we can move forward with this?
Well, I think there will be a border drawn. I mean, that's really ultimately the issue. So we have the republics that have declared independence from Ukraine, that have now voted to join with Russia. Where is the border going to be? That's probably going to be the primary point of contention in the talks, right? Ukraine thinks that their borders go all the way, that Crimea belongs to them, that all of these republics are Ukrainian territory. They've said that winning in the war means that every inch of modern Ukraine, that every inch of it is under the control of Kiev. Now, Russian President Putin pointed out that the very borders of Ukraine were drawn by the Soviet Union. And that, there was the Russian Empire originally, and that it was all just part of the Russian Empire, and Ukraine was like a region. Then after the Russian Revolution, Lenin drew borders, and then Stalin expanded those borders, and then Khrushchev expanded those borders, and the borders of Ukraine have been expanding as a result of the Soviet Union. When they were part of the Soviet Union, they were all the same country anyway. The borders of what you call Ukraine have expanded and expanded to the time when, the Soviet Union fell. Crimea was part of Ukraine, etc. So, Ukrainian nationalism, this perspective that views Ukrainians as an inherent nationality, that are very opposed to Russia, that argue that they must assert their independence from Russia. It has this notion that we must be a separate country, that we and the Russians have a diametrically opposed history, etc. And yet they're using borders that are were drawn by the Soviet Union, which they hate so much. And it was the Soviet Union that expanded the territory of Ukraine and to what it is, what it was at the time this war began. And so, Ukraine has maintained that Crimea belongs to them, that all these republics belong to them. And that is going to be the primary point of contention at the talks. Where is the border going to be drawn? I think that that border will be drawn in a way that Ukraine doesn't, lose everything. Obviously, it doesn't lose all of that territory. But it's also going to be drawn in a way that ensures Russia's security and ensures security for the people of the regions that declared independence. There are also going to be recognitions of what rights Ukraine has in terms of military facilities, right? So does Ukraine have the right to have these biolabs? Does Ukraine have the right to have this kind of military force or that kind of military force? Now, Trump has already said that Ukraine will not join NATO. And that's very important because that was a real red line that Russia drawn, that Ukraine joining NATO. But I think what kind of military force will Ukraine be able to maintain, and will Russia have to respect? Right? I mean, will it be in writing that Ukraine has the right to maintain a certain number of weapons and a certain number of military? I think that'll be a big point of debate and discussion. And that if Russia will put in writing that Ukraine as a country has the right to have this much of a military force and has the right to maintain this kind of, and maintain certain number of foreign troops or something like that, I think that'll be up for debate as well, in addition to the borders, ultimately. And we will have to see. But I think, the border is the main point of contention, but also how much of a military the Ukrainian government is able to maintain, and what kind of military apparatus they can have. Can they keep the biolabs? Can they keep all kinds of foreign, military assistance, et cetera? I think that'll be a point of debate as well.
Yeah, I guess the question is, they have gone so long with this idea that Vladimir Putin wants all of Ukraine. I'm wondering if that's also going to be part of it. Meaning, like, this kind of fantasy that all of this was unprovoked war of aggression. Would that be part of the mix of, hey, we're not taking all of Ukraine, everything is great, so we can move forward?
Well, Russia will be expected to acknowledge Ukraine, and that's the crazy thing, and that actually kind of makes it convenient for Russia, because Russia's never wanted all of Ukraine,
exactly.
Right? But that's been the narrative we've all gotten. So if Russia puts in writing, we do not want all of Ukraine, Kiev is independent, Ukraine is an independent country that has the right to exist. If they put all of that in writing, Russia's always said that. But to the Western audience, that sounds like, oh, see,
Exactly.
they made it. So I don't know. I mean, we're in a very strange world, and they do have to save face to some degree. My concern is that it appears that when an actual peace agreement is in the works, I expect all the stops are going to come out. I mean, they're going to call, Trump has sold out Ukraine and sell it, and that's why it's going to be really important for guys like you and me to be out there and just raise from the heavens as loud as we possibly can support for this peace deal. We have to be out there to push back against that. And we have to show public support for ending the war, because they're gonna, that guy who tried to kill Trump, Ryan Roth, I called him a Ukrainiac, Ukraine maniac. The Ukrainiacs are going to be out in full force, screaming. I was at Tulsi Gabbard's confirmation hearing. They were outside protesting. The Ukrainiacs were out there. Oh my gosh, that there, and the Ukrainiacs are going to be out there like crazy, and they're going to be amplified by mainstream media. And so it's going to be our job to push back against it and show that, no, there are Americans who do want a peace deal and are concerned about the danger of World War III. And we need to be out there. I mean, I'm headed to Minneapolis this weekend, and we're going to be in the streets of Minneapolis on Sunday saying, sign the treaty, peace agreement, in the streets protesting to support, probably be a small demonstration of my organization. We're going out there to have a workshop this weekend. But we're planning on Sunday, after our workshop is over, we're headed to downtown Minneapolis, and we're going to have a small demonstration making clear that we support the peace deal. And we want, the peace talks in Saudi Arabia to continue. We want peace in Ukraine. And I think it's going to be important that other people do the same thing. We have to very loudly make clear we support ending this war, because mainstream media will try to drown out our voices.
I'm fascinated by the Democrats' take on this. It seems to be the most lefty thing in the world to not want a war, and yet that is not where they are. For them, it is Donald Trump is doing this, and because Donald Trump is doing this, it's by definition bad, and that you shouldn't necessarily support and inflame somebody that is an ogre. And I've even had people say, I can't believe that Jamal is simping for Trump. And it's like, dude, I thought the guy should have been put in a cage after he tried to overthrow the election. I'm not simping for anybody. I'm more so ecstatic that a war that has gotten all of these people killed are coming to an end. It's that part. Why do you think there's such a disconnect with that? Is it really just Trump is an ogre, and so you can't necessarily do anything to support Trump? What is your take when people say that about you?
It's a little deeper than that. I think the reason that the mainstream left is so opposed to peace in Ukraine is because the main vehicle that this kind of Eastern establishment, the intelligence apparatus, uses to target countries is the color revolution apparatus, the social justice NGO, folks that get their funding from USAID and run, workshops about feminism and LGBT rights in different countries and talk about social justice, the human rights activist apparatus, which is very left and liberal in the way it presents itself. That's the main vehicle that carries out these regime change operations. And it views Russia as a target because it's the main servant of U.S. foreign policy. And because of that, they're the ones that are most committed to it. On top of that, Russia has really presented itself as a champion of social conservatism. They don't have gay marriage in Russia. And there's a lot of people from Australia and from Western Europe who've moved to Russia because they're socially conservative, because they don't want their kids to grow up in a society that has gay marriage and things like that. And that the rainbow flags and all of that, they bring in neoliberalism. They bring in market reforms, right? It's not simply about people's freedom and their right to be who they are. It's about tearing down the kind of social fabric that can stand up to neoliberalism and can stand up to Wall Street and can insist on things like guaranteed jobs and healthcare for the population. And that, free market neoliberal economics is brought in with the rainbow flag, right? And so the left has become, really dominated by this intelligence created apparatus that uses, social liberal causes as a vehicle for destabilizing countries. And so Russia has, been standing up against that. Russia has been a target of that. And so Russia really presents itself as being socially conservative. And so we don't have, it used to be left was associated with communism, right? You had the communist parties and they were aligned with the Soviet Union. That's long gone. I mean, that's decades ago, right? So now left is really just synonymous with the color revolution apparatus. And Russia is a main target of that. Russia has been a main institution to push back against that. So it makes sense that the left would be vehemently opposed to Russia. I mean, that's just kind of the situation that we're in. Leftism is really just George Soros ideology at this point. It's not got anything to do with what happened in the 20th century with communism or anything like that. Leftism is, it's degrowth, right? The idea there's too many people in the world, we need to reduce the population, climate change. Leftism is cancel culture. Leftism is, tearing people down. Leftism is the kind of shrill, woke atmosphere that's, taken hold. And that's not what, that's certainly not what Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X believed. That's certainly not what the Black Panthers believed. That's certainly not what the labor unions of the 1930s were built on. This new left or woke is a whole new invention that is purely intelligence controlled, I would argue, and is just a vehicle for spreading regime change and instability and asserting control by the big monopolies. And that ideology is something Russia has very much stood against.
So that's why you get the Democratic Party that seems to be so over the top anti-Russian that it goes beyond just this idea of what leftism used to be. It's this kind of new norm in regards to what leftism is that has a bunch of value sets that go along with. Because you're right, I'm always confused by it on some level, because it's not just one thing. It's a body of ideas that you need to accept in order to play in that club. And I find that to be so strange. Like, to me, it's like Okay, if you can end the war, that's a good thing. Call it a day. That's a good thing. Or whoever is doing it, that's a good thing. That's the way I look at it. That's not the way they look at it. And you see it on shows like the Young Turks. You see it on shows like Sam Cedar. All of these guys, they have a very specific ideology and a body of ideas that you either take it all or you take none of it. To me, that makes no sense because I don't think human beings function that way. I think part of the reason that shows like Joe Rogan, part of the reason, even Tucker Carlson, is because people tend to function, they have points of view that vary. Meaning it's not they're carrying one body of ideas and this body of ideas is the only thing that makes you elect. No, they're going to be something on the right on, something to the left on. I'm a person. How do you think that migrated? I mean, do you think that's just an intelligence creation or do you think that was organic? Give me a framing on that.
Well,
I think it was a weird conversation, but I am curious on your take.
I view what you can call the left now, the woke left, the synthetic left, whatever you want to call it. I view that as a three-stage formation. First, you had an effort by the CIA during the 1950s to create space between the kind of intellectuals and scientists and engineers and smart people who became communists and the Soviet Union. Right. It was during the 1950s, even at the height of McCarthyism, the Soviet Union was able to have a huge conference at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. And Albert Einstein got up and supported them. And, Aaron Copland got up and supported them. And some of the smartest actors and writers and musicians and scientists and intellectuals in the United States got up and defended the Soviet Union at the Waldorf Peace Conference. And the CIA was furious about this. And they said, how can this be? So they started funneling money to a program they created called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And it was basically CIA money, along with money from the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation. And they were subsidizing intellectuals that were leftists, that were critical of U.S. society, critical of U.S. militarism, critical of U.S. consumerism, that were anti-communist and against the Soviet Union. And they waged kind of cancel culture campaigns against different intellectuals like Albert Einstein, against Lillian Hellman, the playwright, against others who were sympathetic with the Soviet Union. And it was kind of an attempt to kind of nudge leftist politics in a new direction. That was stage one. After a while, you had the 1960s and all of that. They realized that exporting these people and, sending this project of kind of a leftism that had been kind of reinvented by American intelligence and the Frankfurt School, sending that around the world was a very useful vehicle for destabilizing the communist countries. And you had the Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia in 1968, where these people that were aligned with Dubček, who was a leader who took power in Czechoslovakia, who was against the Soviet Union, they were presented almost like hippies, right? They were young people with long hair, with flowers, protesting the tanks and all of that. And they realized that like this left-wing aesthetic was very useful in demonizing the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union ended up sending soldiers to Czechoslovakia to put down the uprising, and they were able to frame it as these are young people who believe in peace and all of that. And it was kind of brilliant staging. And then you had the color revolutions of the 1980s that were largely, it was these kind of like liberal activist NGO people. They weren't Soviet hardline communists. It was this new kind of leftism that had been a reinvention of leftism was very useful in setting the stage for overthrowing the various Eastern European Marxist governments. And George Soros paid for it. He funded art galleries and he funded all kinds of efforts to court various young people, usually the most privileged people in the former socialist countries, the children of the party elite who were going to universities, and the artists, the filmmakers and others, and subsidizing their work and courting them and hearing their grievances and amplifying their grievances against the system and all of that. And so that was stage two, was the creation of, with this kind of fake left creating an apparatus to destabilize countries. I would argue that then in 2008, when the U.S. economy crashed, there was a lot of instability potentially falling out of the financial crisis. The USA has really never recovered from that, I don't think. I mean, 2008 was a long time ago, but we haven't gotten better. I don't think we've ever really recovered. I think that color revolution apparatus came home, and Barack Hussein Obama a guy who had taught classes for the Ford Foundation and at Acorn and was part of that apparatus and had gone to various countries to organize color revolutions. And his mother was a researcher for the Ford Foundation, and his stepfather was involved in the military coup that overthrew the Indonesian government in 1965. And Barack Obama, who is part of that apparatus, was brought home, and with social media, with these new inventions called Facebook and Twitter, they brought that apparatus back to the United States to assert control. And that the color revolution apparatus came home in an attempt to control U.S. society, because you had the Tea Party and you had a lot of these lower level capitalists that weren't going to let Barack Obama do, healthcare reform, regulate Wall Street, because they viewed it as a threat to their profits. And so in the hope of stabilizing the U.S. country, and after the financial crisis, they brought the color revolution apparatus back to the United States. And that's what woke really is when it gets down to it. And I saw this in real time. I was part of Occupy Wall Street, and I saw how there were a bunch of people from Eastern Europe who said, if you ask them what they'd done, I helped overthrow Milosevic, and I helped overthrow and now I'm here, occupying Wall Street and controlling leftist politics in a way that it was very much this degrowth ideology, this pessimism, this obsession with gender, this obsession with LGBT, et cetera. And that color revolution apparatus was brought home. And that's what we can call the left today, is very much that. And that's where it came from. And that's why the Democratic Party is more pro-war at this point. It's just completely consumed by this apparatus that was created. With government money and USAID and all of that, they've created a whole apparatus, and that apparatus is what the left is. And Donald Trump and Elon Musk are pulling the plug on it. They're trying to cut off the funding for their own political reasons. It makes sense.
Caleb, man, always appreciate you joining me. I always appreciate these conversations. Caleb Maupin, he's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. His most recent book, I'm going to let you tell them for it. I don't have it written down here, but you can follow Caleb on Twitter at Caleb Maupin and read his articles at calebmaupin.com. You should also check out, what is it? Center for American Progress. It's not Center for American Progress.
Center for Political Innovation is our
Center for Political Innovation.
CPIUSA.org. Center for Political Innovation. We are doing great stuff, having workshops all over the country, and we are the Center for Political Innovation.
And we'll be in Minneapolis
this weekend.
Rally.
This weekend we're having a workshop on Saturday, and then we're going to be having a small rally somewhere in Minneapolis, unannounced, on Sunday. So it's going to be fun. So I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot of people in this country who really like what we have to offer. We're pro-growth, we're optimistic, and we do want a government of action that fights for working families. We're not part of this fake left apparatus, but we certainly don't believe that getting the government out is the solution, right? We want a government of action that fights for working families, and we're innovating. We're in a new period where old formulas don't work. We're innovating for our new times. And so I hope that people can check out what we put out as CPI. We have a lot of great people working with us, people like Peter Coffin and others. You were at our event in DC. We have an optimistic message that is very unique in American politics at this time.
And needed. I appreciate that meeting in DC. I appreciated the people you brought together, and I appreciated the message. So, Caleb, thank you for this, man. Caleb Maupin, definitely check him out. The man is awesome. Like I said, everything that comes out of his mouth, I agree with your take on this stuff. Thank you for this, Caleb.
Sure thing. Thank you.
All right. Fantastic. I love that point of view. I want less war. For full transparency, I want less war. I make it senseless. I sat perched at my post watching person after person, video after video of people being killed, and for it to go on thousands of people for years. And you look at this and you're like, okay, this is outlandish. Why am I the only one that thinks this is outlandish? I'm not the only one, but it feels like you are. When the country is pumping out a media that is telling you something that is different from the reality that you are engaging. And so the meeting in Riyadh, I'm hoping that it actually brings this to a close. I'm hoping that Trump signs a deal to bring this to a close. I am hoping that he's able to withstand the screaming that you're going to get when that deal is on the table and he is about to sign it with his pen. And that he has the power to push it through Congress, because it would need to go through Congress and it would need to be signed by a legal representative from Ukraine, who right now is not Zelensky. So I hope Peter is right. There's an optimism that is coming along with this because this seems different. This seems new. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. I would like to play a clip by Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs has been doing God's work. Like, God, man, he has been doing God's work. And he has been one of those people pushing back on narratives that come out of Western media that are often wrong, unchallenged, and yet are put out as reality. Sachs has been one of those people who has been in the room in negotiations when the Soviet Union fell, who has dealt with the economic realities of many of the Soviet countries as they were becoming something else. So he knows what he's talking about in a direct way. And he makes that point very clear when he gives his lectures and speeches. This is Sachs given, I'm going to just say, giving reality.
The future is amazing. The technological opportunity is astounding. The rate of advance, unprecedented. And yet, where we are today, just a few hundred miles away, there's war before our eyes. Tens of thousands being slaughtered. We have war in Palestine. We have war in Lebanon. We have war in Sudan. We have war in South Sudan. We have war in Yemen. We have war in Ukraine. What is happening that we're in the midst of the greatest advance of knowledge in history, and yet we also feel we're at the edge of the precipice? And indeed, the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists tells us we're 90 seconds to midnight to nuclear disaster. I have one basic proposition for us, ladies and gentlemen. We don't need artificial intelligence in war. We need human intelligence to stop the wars. We don't need more smart weapons. We need negotiations. We had a wonderful panel. But the panel we really need is President Biden, President Putin, and President Xi Jinping, and your crown prince and others sitting around the table.
Real quick, I'm going to read this one. Sushi Gang. Y'all care about white Russians, but nothing about the global South. That's not true. I cover all of it. I hate all of these wars. I don't want any of these wars, just to be very clear. In regards to Jeffrey Sachs, it's not intelligence. Like Robert McNamara in his, what is the movie called? I can't think of the movie. It'll come to me in a moment. He talks about this notion that, what did he say? It's not rationality. It requires something other than rationality. Because a rational take can lead you to a place where you think doing this makes sense. And so this idea that, well, we require intelligence. Yeah, you require intelligence, but you require something else on top of it. It's like a larger consciousness of something. Of, okay, I get that I may be able to take advantage in this moment and get something out of it, but I'm going to lose later on in doing this. Meaning it requires something larger than this kind of specific intelligence and how do I get advantage? How do I get ahead? How do I maintain control? Those are different things, as opposed to how do I stop a war? How do I keep a war from beginning? Those are different things. Intelligence can lead you, or rationality can lead you to places where you believe it is in my rational interest to do this in order to get advantage. Okay, well, people kill for that. People steal for that. People do all sorts of horrible things for that. And rationality can take you to bad places. It requires something else. He's right. I'm just saying it goes beyond that. Let's keep going.
To say we can't go on this way. We're going to destroy ourselves with all of this wonderful technology. We're not doing the most basic things that we need to do. And this is a room filled with people who can do those things or make them happen, who can talk to the politicians, who can fund the changes that are needed. We have a basic core concept that I just want to share in just a couple of minutes: sustainable development. It means we have not only the great economic advances and the wealth, and that's no doubt we have that, but that it also reaches people everywhere, not just a small part of the world, everywhere. And that it's done in an environmentally sound way, not like last year, which was the warmest year on Earth in 130,000 years. We know that. We're wrecking the planet with all of this great economic advance unless we change course. And the fourth pillar, in addition to the economic, the social, and the environmental, is peace. And we're the worst at this. What does peace come from? One simple idea: mutual respect, honesty, not trying to run the world or to dominate others.
He's hitting the U.S. on this. He is hitting the U.S. on this. I love Jeffrey Sachs. I am a huge fan of Sachs. He's right. He's right. Like, this idea that you can engage from a position where I'm not accepting your core needs is nonsense. And so this idea of I'm going to come to you and I'm going to treat you as a subordinate, and as I talk to you, and believe that some deal is going to be reached from that framing is nonsense. That is why it is so important, or it is an important moment, I'll say it that way, for Trump to accept certain premises that would allow a framework, a placement, a space for negotiation. It's fascinating. All of this is fascinating to me. Like, I am blown away in this kind of whiplash of events in the way that they've unfolded. I want to see the latest meeting or the latest reports coming out of the meeting. I mean, they're 6-7 hours ahead of where we are. And so I was curious to see whether anything was coming out of the talks that are relevant. 1 second. I'm looking at tasks for this. Up to this point, I've seen nothing. Constructive U.S. talks explore joint economic opportunities. Head of the RDIF, Kirill Dmitriev, expressed gratitude for Saudi Arabia for providing the platform for negotiations. Right here, let's flip to this. See the latest, and then I will call this episode a day. It says, unlike the administration of former President Joe Biden, there was no attempt to hear Russia's position. There was a very clear attempt to start a dialogue, to understand Russia's position, to discuss where we agree, where we disagree. So, of course, it was very constructive dialogue. We have a very long, serious road ahead of us, but this is a very positive start to opening meaningful dialogue. There are areas of common interest. Everyone understands that there's positive economic projects that can connect us further. Okay, that's good. That's good. Let's see where it goes. I am going to end this. I want to thank all of you for joining me. I'm going to end it a little bit early because I have something that I need to do and accomplish. But I want to thank all of you for joining me. I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow. There is a chat President Jafar, thank you very much, President Jafar. This year's Super Bowl performance was deemed works and DEI because the performers were black and anti-woke, and anti-DEI at its core is anti-black. President Jafar, shout out to you. I want to thank all of you. You guys make the show what it is. If you enjoyed this content, like it, share it. You can always support it through PayPal or Patreon. Super chat, super stickers, memberships, all of that stuff helps keeps this content going. And I thank you for it. You guys have a good day. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 97.